It's now once again my pleasure to introduce Norm Gissel, who is the interim president of the Kootenai County Task Force, who will be introducing our keynote speaker.
I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I have followed the career of our guest speaker now for many years, and I'm just thrilled that he's here. I haven't waited with such anticipation as to what was to be said next. When it was 29 years ago, I introduced my very Palestinian Arab wife to my very North Idaho parents. And when I did that, I stood back and I was very attentive to what was being said next. And I have that same feeling of anticipation today. It was love at first sight, as was my relationship with my wife. How can we describe our guest speaker in any useful way to this group? This group is a group of like-minded people. How I understand civil rights activists and people that have a passion for equality and fairness and dignity for humanity. What I think we are collectively in this room are private citizens in search of the public good. And it is in that context that I would like to introduce our speaker. We can talk about his legal career that has spanned over 30 years, and by any legal standard, by any measure of professional judgment, it has been an astonishingly wonderful legal career. But we are private citizens in search of the public good, and that's not a very good definition for us tonight. We can discuss his many honors and awards that he's received throughout his fruitful life, including 6 honorary degrees and counting. But that doesn't help us either. We could, and more interestingly, describe our guest speaker in terms that his foes would describe him. A little bit of history is important here. The Klan, the Ku Klux Klan, organized in Pulaski, Tennessee in 1867. And from that point in time, unbelievably, from that point in time until 1987, the Klan as an entity, in its little cell groups as entity, had never had a civil judgment entered against them for all of the crimes and the lynchings and the mayhem committed in the Klan's name. The legal system in America was a safe harbor for the Klan. During the 80s, there was yet another lynching. Lynchings essentially are the social contribution of the Klan in America. Well, this lynching was different because I believe it was the mother of this young boy that was murdered and lynched by these monsters came to see our guest speaker, and she says, "This isn't right." And this great man had a different vision of what our judicial system should be all about when it applies itself to the Klan's activities. And for the first time in American judicial history, there was a civil order award addressed against this Klan entity for something like $7 million. One would think that would be enough, but Tom Metzger from California and his White Aryan Resistance, an organization called WAR by its acronym, believed that lightning would not strike twice in the same cesspool. And he incited a couple of young thugs from Portland, Oregon, as a blood sport on a Sunday or a Saturday night to bludgeon to death an African male who had immigrated to the United States to seek a better life, killed him with a baseball bat. Much to Mr. Metzger's astonishment, once again the focus of our guest speaker's attentions was addressed to this situation, and he found himself being sued in federal court. And there was a PBS special that covered that trial, and it was a wonderful thing, and many of you, I'm sure, saw it. And a $12.5 million judgment was rendered against Mr. Metzger and his organization. And for those that would think of committing further atrocities, lightning can strike thrice in the same cesspool, so that's a good warning to them. But even when we discuss this man, from the definitional way of his enemies and our enemies and the enemies of democracy. And I rather think at this point they don't think of him as a man opposed to them or as a good attorney. I think they rather regard him as a force of nature, an elemental force of nature, something along the lines of Hurricane Morris. But when I try to describe him in our terms, in the terms that we care about as private citizens in pursuit of the public good, I'm reminded of a letter written in 1805 by a gentleman who, they had a bad day in the House of Commons in England, and he wrote a letter to a wonderful man, reminds me a lot of our guest speaker, William Wilberforce, who is given credit as the private citizen who drove slavery from England and ultimately drove the slave trade from the British Empire. And he wrote to William and he says, "The public good is of not much interest to the ministers at this time." And what that tells me, and I think about that statement, and I think about the history of America, and what's remarkable about the history of America and our democracy is that private citizens in search of the public good are the types of people that make the greatest change in our society. And immediately as I've said that, I think everybody in this room thinks of Martin Luther King Jr. as probably the greatest example of a private citizen in search of the public good. Our guest speaker is another person of that stature and another person for the history books of America. He is our friend, our mentor, our ally. He is a man of great courage, great wisdom, great strength. He is a private citizen in search of the public good. I would like to introduce you now to Mr. Morris Dees. Give him a round welcome.
Thank you very much for your kind comments. I spoke to this group about 3 years ago, and not much has changed. When I sat down at the table tonight, maybe it's because we're at a Catholic university, but there was no wine at the table. It kind of reminds me of my Sunday school teacher in the Baptist church back home when I said, you know, why do Baptists not drink alcohol, especially why don't they drink wine? Because Jesus, you know, I reminded her, turned water into wine. And she said, you know, little Morris, she said, we'd have probably thought more of him if he hadn't have. But kind of early on, I picked up a little bit of religious attitude coming from the Deep South. And I won't try to change your customs and practice. A lot has occurred, though, since I spoke to your group last down in Eugene, Oregon. A lot of bad things have happened. Ruby Ridge, Waco, the Oklahoma City bombing. And I come here tonight not to receive any honors from you, but I come here to honor you for the work that you're doing on the local level in the Northwest to teach and preach and live tolerance. There are a lot of people working around this nation, different groups and organizations that certainly deserve a lot of respect. Leonard Zeskin and the award he received is a perfect example. Chip Burley, who works in supplying information out of his office in Boston. Individuals who, some have put on programs here, Danny Levitas and others, Ken Stern with the American Jewish Committee and Rick Eaton with the Wiesenthal Center. The people at the Southern Poverty Law Center, its teaching tolerance programs, its militia task force, all those certainly make a major contribution. But it's individuals like you on the local level is where the rubber really meets the road, and that's what counts. And as I look out in this vast audience and see all you people crowded in, it really makes me very proud that you invited me here to share your wonderful experience. I just finished writing a book called Gathering Storm, America's Militia Threat. And as I sat in several of these programs up here today listening to the various workshops and saw people sitting with laptop computers taking down notes, I was a little bit envious. I'm still in the Smith Corona manual typewriter stage. In fact, I typed all 65,000 words myself on my manual typewriter. It may be the only thing Theodore Kaczynski and I have in common. I asked, in all seriousness, the FBI agent, I had lunch with the prosecutor who's going to prosecute him and the man who's defending him. And we were both in Sacramento at a luncheon similar to this recently. And I asked him if they would, after they finish the trial and it's all said and done, let me have those 3 manual typewriters they found in his cabin because they don't make them anymore. But in writing Gathering Storm, it probably became clearer to me than it ever has been as to how deeply divided this nation is. It's been the subject of a lot of the workshop sessions you've had, and it was the subject of a wonderful speech this morning by the keynote speaker. We're divided along class lines, economic lines, political lines, religious lines, but no deeper division is there in this country than along racial lines. And when I say racial, I pretty much mean black and white, people of color and white people. The O.J. Simpson trial probably illustrates that greater than anything else when, before the trial was over, and when the evidence that was available to all people in this country was essentially the same, they got it all from television, that African Americans polled believed to the tune of about 70% that O.J. Simpson was innocent. And non-African Americans, when polled, about the same percentage believed that he was guilty. And they were all looking, and we were all looking, at the same facts, but we were looking at them through different eyes, through different expectations, and through different experiences. Probably the bombing of the Oklahoma City federal courthouse, the Murrah Federal Courthouse, also illustrates another very troubling and deeply divided problem in this country. If Timothy McVeigh is guilty, and he appears to be possibly from the evidence at least that we've seen, when Timothy McVeigh drove away from that building and he heard that awesome explosion behind him, he probably felt a sense of patriotic pride that he was acting as a soldier for this country, doing a soldier's duty. He probably felt that those casualties in that building were simply casualties of war who were occupying enemy territory. And the battle he was fighting was a battle that had been touted for many years in a book that was his Bible, the Turner Diaries, which you know so much about. And that battle is a battle over whose America this is. Mr. McVeigh, if he's guilty, believed that it belonged to Aryan white people, as he was taught in the book whose crime he emulated, almost down to the exact time of day, the exact amount of ammonium nitrate, and the blowing up of a federal building. I suspect before this battle is over, there'll be other casualties when we all try to determine whose America this is. I had a trial recently that Norm related to and mentioned over in Portland, Oregon. My client's family, the people I represented, came to this country from Ethiopia. They sent their son to the United States to receive an American education And they had an idea that America was a land of opportunity open to people around the world who could legally come here. And when Mulugata Sarau left Addis Ababa, he left literally with a dream and a hope and a promise and an expectation that he could have a great opportunity in this country if he worked hard. And the fact that he was a black man never crossed his mind that that would be a deterrent. And when he arrived in this country, a great Catholic institution in Portland gave him a job in a teaching school, and he worked in the basement, and in that room, sleeping next to the furnace, a little box in the corner held his clothes, and those that he brought from Ethiopia was pretty much all he had. But he had that dream and hope that he could do good. He got his clothes from the Salvation Army and worked hard. He was a slightly built man, like so many people are from Ethiopia. He was very courteous and polite. And while he was working there, they found him a better job while he was still a student at the Avis Car Rental Company. He carried people from the airport in a van out to the satellite parks. And when Mulugata carried these people, he was very courteous. If they lost an umbrella or a purse on the bus or left it on the bus, he tried to get it to them. And for his courtesy to the customers of Avis, they elected him Employee of the Month. But there was another man about 1,200 miles away down in Portland, Oregon, who had a different idea about America and whose America it is. And his name is Tom Metzger. You've heard of Tom Metzger. You've seen him on television, quite a spokesperson for his cause, the white Aryan resistance. He's become kind of the godfather of the skinheads during the mid and late 1980s. And Metzger was trying to organize skinheads around the country with the message that unless we eliminated the mud people from America, and by that and through his material, that meant those individuals who weren't Aryan whites, Hispanics, Native Americans, African Americans, Jews, Italians, and all others, that unless we eliminated them from this nation, America would fall like many great powers in the past, and we would lose our greatness. And he sent his national vice president of organization up to Portland, Oregon, to organize a little skinhead group called East Side White Pride. And he met with this organizer met with these young men and told them about Metzger's beliefs and philosophy of creating incidents of racial violence to hurry along the race war they hoped would return America to the control of Aryan white people. And one night, after such a meeting with a group of skinheads, and as they departed their meeting room, went out on the street, they saw a black man get out of an automobile. And they walked over to him and taunted him and called him racial epithets. And Mulugata, who was coming home from his job at Avis, said, you know, peace, peace, please. No trouble, may I help you? And while they continued to taunt him, one walked around behind him and with the full swing of an aluminum baseball bat, crushed his skull. And Mulugata died there on the streets of Portland. The Portland police caught those three skinheads, and they was quickly convicted and got long prison sentences. And the case would have ended there, except that a United States attorney from that area called and asked if we wouldn't come with our legal team and see if we couldn't represent that family back in Ethiopia and get some money to support Mulugata's little son, who he left there, and the son's mother. His little son, Henoch, was 7 years old. And his mother made only $20 a week, working 6 10-hour days, taking up tokens on a bus. We came in and talked with the Portland police, and they gave us a handwritten letter they had found when they searched one of the skinheads' rooms. And that letter was from Tom Metzger in his own handwriting. And the letter told those skinheads in Portland, the East Side White group, that when you meet our organizer, we'll teach you how we operate. And so using a legal theory that is old as the English common law, that if you organize a group and sponsor them and send your agents out, then you're vicariously liable for what they do. We filed a suit against Metzger in Portland on behalf of this family. Metzger, who had good lawyers, who drafted all of his papers, and who put forth a pretty strong defense because he said, look, I was 1,200 miles away. I didn't know the victim. I didn't know the skinheads. My agent wasn't there when this happened. I didn't know any of these people. I was simply preaching my beliefs, my philosophy of white Aryan supremacy. And his lawyers made all the right arguments, but when it came time to go to court, Metzger decided that he would represent himself because he thought we had no case. Well, he also, I guess, wanted to become a bigger person, a bigger man in the whole racist movement in the country by defeating the lawyers at the law center. Well, he probably didn't count on the fact that his national vice president of organization would become our star witness. I talked to this young man. I brought him to Montgomery and fed him some grits and carried him down near the swamp where we have some alligators. And as you know, Hank Williams wrote a great song, He Saw the Light. But truthfully, this young man had made a lot of mistakes in his life, and Dave Mazzella felt that he would be better on our side than on Metzger's. And what we did with Mazzella, we've done with 6 or 7 other witnesses in other cases against white supremacy groups, is we tried to take the time, and I tried to take the time, to learn where he was coming from. Because a lot of people in these militia groups are not bad people. And I'll talk about that a few minutes later. But this young man got on the stand and told that Metzger explained to him that it was necessary to teach racial violence. And at the end of the trial, Metzger stood before that jury and said, ladies and gentlemen, I don't apologize for my beliefs. And I hope you don't find me guilty here and financially ruin me and my organization because of our beliefs. I do believe that everything in this nation that made America great was a contribution from Aryan white people, and I believe that America really belongs to us Aryan white people. I stood for a moment and I was a bit concerned because Oregon is basically a liberal state. This whole northwestern part of the United States are progressive people. These people that have given your country a bad name out here don't represent the majority of people in this area. And I was concerned very much about how the jury might feel sorry for our client, but rule for Metzger thinking they was carrying out the law, and I wondered, what could I say to them in response? I said, you know, as I sit here and look at little Henoch Sarah, who I'd brought from Ethiopia to be at my table, little 7-year-old Henoch and dressed in his native clothes, I said, you know, I also looked out at Mr. Metzger's children sitting out behind him on the front row of his courtroom. And I thought, you know, they never had to worry about getting polio because of the genius of the Jewish doctor Jonas Salk. And if we lived in Tom Metzger's America, we wouldn't have the beautiful music of the Jewish composer Leonard Bernstein, or the brilliance of the black African-American general Colin Powell, and I mentioned other nationalities, races, and people. And I said, you know, ladies and gentlemen, the America that Tom Metzger believes is so great, and the reason is an America that never existed. We're great because of our diversity, not in spite of it. That jury returned a verdict that I believe validated my confidence in this nation and who this nation really belongs to against Metzger. And I wish courtrooms with a lottery, and I could take the $12.5 million around to the window and collect. But we have collected everything Metzger had. We made him sell his house, his television business, and he doesn't have an organization anymore, and he pretty much operates out of an apartment, and he publishes a paper once every few months, and our agents go to his post office box every month and take all of his mail out and get a third of every dime that comes in. And little Henrik Sarah has got about $200,000, and that makes him a billionaire in Ethiopia. But you know, as I was flying back to Alabama from that trial in Portland, and as I was crossing this great nation and flying over the Rockies and the plains and the Appalachian Mountains going into Georgia, I thought to myself, if America's a great nation because of our diversity, why can't we all get along? I thought a lot about that when I wrote Gathering Storm about America's militia movement, and I've thought a lot about it since. And you know, I think that what we have out here is a lot of fear, a lot of anger, and a lot of frustration. And on that group that's most deeply divided in this country, blacks on one hand and whites on the other hand, that fear and anger and frustration is probably the driving force because that division. On the one hand, you have African Americans in this country who say, look, we had the civil rights movement, and Dr. Martin Luther King promised us, and this country promised us, equal opportunity. But we don't have an equal opportunity in this country. The place I work has a glass ceiling. I can only go so high. I can see there, but I can't get there. And when I go down and apply for a loan at the bank, the Federal Reserve tells me that African Americans with the same identical credit credentials of whites are turned down 4 times as great because of the perception that they can't pay. And when I think about this fear and anger and frustration, I'm reminded of a black lawyer in Washington, in the city of New York, who actually came from a small farm down in Georgia. He was about 65 years old, and he was close to retirement. He had gone to Harvard Law School. He had worked hard. It was a Wall Street law firm. His office was on the 65th floor of a large building, and he made a lot of money. And he always got to work early in the morning, like he was taught to get up early on that farm where he was raised down in South Georgia. And when he walked one morning off of the elevator towards the big mahogany doors of that law office, a young man was getting off with him, and the young white man turned to the old black lawyer and said, "Sir, may I help you?" And the old gentleman kind of paid him no attention and walked on towards the big mahogany doors of that law firm, reached in his pocket to take the key out because he always got to work before the secretaries. And the young white man pushed his way in front of him and said, "Sir, I ask you, may I help you?" And the old gentleman looked at him and he said, "Son," he said, "I'm a partner in this law firm. You just joined last month." And the old gentleman walked in his office and he turned his chair around towards a window that looked out over the end of Manhattan Island there where the Statue of Liberty sits, and put his feet up on his credenza, and he thought to himself, "Today I was judged by the color of my skin, not by my law degree. I did what they said you had to do to succeed. I went to a fine law school. My clothes are just as fine as that young man. And you know, I'm sad because I wonder," he thought to himself, "I wonder what kind of country that I'm leaving to my children and my grandchildren. Anger and frustration." And on the other side, and I know I'm making generalizations because there are gray areas all the way in between, but a lot of white people today say, "Look, I believe in everything that Dr. Martin Luther King believed in too. You know, in fact, I wasn't even around when they marched from Selma to Montgomery. I wasn't even born. But you know," And I believe in giving people an equal opportunity, but that's not what they want today. They want a guaranteed slice of the pie, and that's not American. I'm not for that. I'm not giving up my slot that I got in law school because they got some kind of system to try to have a balanced enrollment. I'm not giving up my job. I earned that. And they say, well, you know, I don't want those people in my neighborhood. I've only got one house, and they'll cause the property values to go down. And they'll bring crime and drugs in and ruin the schools, and I've only got one set of kids, and I can't afford to put them in a private school. Anger, frustration, fear, and a lot of misinformation. But what I have found out over the last 37 years that I've been a lawyer, and before that, a student and raised on a small farm in Alabama, I found out that regardless of our skin color, our race, our religion, we have basically the same goals and desires in life. And those are to have a family that we can educate, to have a job so that we won't have to be dependent on others, the ability to save money for our future so that we will not have to be dependent on our children, or on the government, or on welfare. Hopefully, we hope to own a home or an apartment or some place that we can't be put in the street. And we want neighbors and friends that we can be with and love and enjoy. I wish I knew the answer to this great divide that we're struggling with in our country today. In the O.J. second trial, probably will stir up about as much as the first one, because now we have a majority white jury, and I'm already hearing on television the commentators talking about how that might be an unfair verdict the other direction. More fear and more confusion and more frustration. Maybe the solution of this problem resides with people like you. Maybe it resides in the words of a song that I remember so well from the civil rights days and the Vietnam War days. A song written by Pete Seeger and made famous by the singing group Peter, Paul, and Mary. You remember, if I had a hammer, I'd hammer in the morning, I'd hammer in the evening, and I'd hammer out over this land. I'd hammer out for freedom, I'd hammer out for justice, and I'd hammer out a love between our brothers and sisters that we can all share. In this nation, we have a great degree of freedom, is probably as much as anywhere in the world. It's not perfect. It's a freedom that we certainly are struggling to make better. We have a great degree of justice in America. And there are people who can attest to that. Rodney King, for one, there was an injustice followed by a trial where I think justice took place. And those people that we might despise in this room, and the people certainly, at least we might pity in this room, and people who preached against our country and our government, people like Randy Weaver, are a living example of how our justice system does work. But unless we have a love between our brothers and sisters that we share, all the Northwest Coalition conferences and all the meetings that we go to and the churches we attend and the lawsuits that we win will really be for naught. Because it will be the bridge. This love that we share will be the bridge across this deep canyon that divides us in this nation. I'll tell a story that I told last night to a group of lawyers, because I think attorneys play a big part in making this justice system work. If you've heard me tell this story before, please forgive me, because most of you haven't. And it's a story that, to me, put the capital L in the word love and taught me as a lawyer the importance of sharing that love with others. It's a sad story, but it's a hopeful story. It's about a woman, an old black lady, who lost her son to a Klansman's noose. Her name was Beulah May Donald, and the Klan group was the United Klans of America. You probably have heard of this group. There are a lot of Klan factions, but this was the big one, the granddaddy of them all, and its members killed Viola Liuzzo on the march from Selma to Montgomery. She was a white woman from Detroit who was helping marchers be transported back and forward in that famous march in 1965 to obtain the right to vote. It was a Klan group who killed the 4 little Sunday school girls in the 16th Street Baptist Church in 1963 with that bomb. And they burned and bombed black churches all over the South and buildings and terrorized people during the days of the Civil Rights Movement. And in the late 1970s and early 80s, like so many racist groups in the country, they had a revival. They had chapters in some 30 states. They were a little bit ahead of the Aryan nations and some of the Posse Comitatus groups because they already were in existence. And they began to flourish when this country turned more to the right. And that group, the national leaders, were paying particular close attention to a criminal trial taking place down in Mobile, Alabama, where a black man was on trial for killing a white police officer. They sent word down to their local Klan unit from the national headquarters that if that nigger, and those are their words, not mine, if he gets off for killing that white police officer, and they were concerned because there was 11 blacks and 1 white sitting on that jury. And that was not unusual for Alabama because things have changed in terms of racial representation. If he gets away, I want you to go find a black person and kill him, to set an example that if blacks are going to sit on juries and judge issues that are concerning white people, they better be careful. And they picked 2 young Klansmen, James Tiger Knowles, 19, and Henry Hayes, 20, to carry out this crime if necessary. And they gave them a gun and a noose and a club and gathered with them in a house in downtown Mobile to watch the television give the jury verdict at about 10 o'clock at night, the 10 o'clock news. The jury stayed out about then, came in and announced that verdict, and those group of Klansmen heard that the verdict was a deadlock jury. And they set about to find this young black person that they could kill. Old, didn't matter. Just the color of his skin was all that counted. And they drove around Mobile until finally they saw a young black man walking down the street. It was close to midnight. It was Michael Donald, who worked at the Mobile Press Register. He went to school at Mobile Junior College. He lived at home with his mother. He was her only son. And they got him in the car by asking him directions for a restaurant. He offered to help, and they put the gun on him, took him across the Bayou Bridge over into Mobile County, and they killed him, brought him back and hung his body in a black neighborhood in downtown Mobile. The FBI took 3 years before they finally caught those 2 young Klansmen, and James Tiger Knowles decided that he would turn evidence, and for that he got a life sentence in the Federal Witness Protection Program where he is today. And he testified against Henry Hayes. I sat through that trial and watched it, and an all-white jury in Mobile gave Henry Hayes the death penalty, and he's on death row down in Holman Prison in Alabama as I speak tonight. And I talked to this young Klansman who turned evidence and asked him would he help me bring some of the other Klansmen to justice, and he said he would. And I spent many days talking to them and finally figured out that we'd sue the United Klans of America, and they had good lawyers, unlike Metzger. At least they had lawyers willing to come to court. And I sued 7 other Klansmen, including this James Tiger Knowles. He had no lawyer, nothing to risk, but I wanted the jury to see the whole cast of characters. And at that trial, Mrs. Donald came and sat. She didn't go to the criminal trials. She had too much hurt and pain, but years later she wanted to come and see all those brought to justice that had anything to do with killing her son. And as she sat there, I put James Tiger Knowles on the witness stand. And I said, James, would you tell the jury what you did? He said, we got Michael in the car, and he didn't know we was with the Klan. But he saw that gun and noose, and he said, please, please, don't kill me. Don't kill me. My mother depends on me. I'm her only son that's working to provide money for her. Beat me up, take my money, but don't kill me. And he said, we got him out of the car, we hit him with that bat, knocked him to the ground, put that noose around his neck, and I got him to get down off the witness stand in front of that jury. And Ms. Donald couldn't help but have seen him. And he showed how they pulled on that rope tight until he had no breath left in his body. And she surely saw the waffle boot print still in his face in that autopsy photograph as I passed it to the jury. The trial ended and the Klan lawyer made an argument, quite different than Metzger, but it's the same, basically, don't hold us guilty because of our beliefs. And he sat down. I asked the jury to find the Klan guilty because we'd shown over a period of incidences how they had used racial violence to carry out their beliefs of white supremacy. I asked the jury to be a part of an important decision to affirm the belief that there is equality in America, and I wanted that all-white jury in that federal court in Mobile to tell the nation that we live in a different South. And I asked them to render a verdict so that one day, when the roll is called for those people who have given their lives in the struggle for human dignity, and when they call out the name of Medgar Evers and Valo Leozo and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, I asked them to render a verdict so they'd call out the name of Michael Donald. And I sat down and the judge began to tell the jury their duties and responsibilities to render a verdict when that young Klansman, James Tiger Knowles, stood. And he said, Your Honor, I would like to say something to the jury here. And the judge said, you're a few minutes late, or I'm already getting ready to charge the jury, but since you don't have a lawyer, I'm going to let you talk. And that young Klansman, who now was in his mid-20s, walked over in front of the jury and put his hands there on the rail, and Ms. Donald was no more than 15 feet from him at our council table. And he said, ladies and gentlemen, you know, we did what Mr. Dees said we did, and we did it at the direction of the leaders of our Klan group. And he said, I learned hatred from the knees of my parents and my uncle as I was a little child. And now I see that I've done wrong. And he looked over at Mrs. Donald, and his lips began to quiver, and he broke down and started sobbing. And I thought the judge would break and give that jury an opportunity to take a little break there and for him to clear his throat, regain his composure, when he said to Mrs. Donald, I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me for what I did to Michael. And that old lady kind of rocked back in her chair and looked at him in front of that jury, and I'll remember it if I live to be 100. She said, son, I've already forgiven you. I can assure you there was not a dry eye in that courtroom, at our council table and in that jury box. And I saw that old judge brush back some tears. This mother, who had lost one of the most precious things in her life, her son, her only son, had the love between a brother and a sister that she could share. She didn't forget what they did. We got 2 more people indicted, and more were tried and imprisoned from the evidence we gathered many years later. But she could reach out to him in his pain as he stood there sobbing, because she understood pain because she suffered and her people 300 or more years of social and economic deprivation and slavery and Jim Crow laws and abuse of every sort. And she understood he too had suffered as a victim of racism like she had suffered as a victim of racism. And I thought the words that came out of her mouth that day was a greater justice than that $7 million award. And as I stand here tonight before you, thinking about the work that you do, and as I've listened in some of these sessions today, I hope that each of you would take to heart what Mrs. Donald did there, because it was a great thing she did. She didn't, I'm sure she was pained and hurt, and I'm sure she was bitter against the people that killed her son, but she also understood that they had pain too. Some of these people that we work against or try to expose and try to stop, maybe they're not blameless when they rob a bank or try to blow up a clinic or try to kill someone, for sure. But many of them are frustrated and angry at loss of jobs, at loss of opportunity, because they have families to support also. And I found that many people in this militia movement, in this patriot movement in this country, are good people who have found and don't believe that the ballot box delivers anything, that there's no real difference between the political parties. And they speak with great passion. If you could hear Louis Beam, who is certainly not my idea of a model citizen, but if you could hear Louis Beam, who is probably one of the brains behind the militia movement, not the buffoon John Trockelman who talks about back helicopters, but Louis Beam, who plots and plans to have an organized militia that can one day overtake this government, if you could hear his speech at Estes Park after Randy Weaver's wife and child was killed, if you could hear the passion this man felt and delivered about how this government senselessly killed the wife and baby of Randy Weaver, and you would understand some of the pain of these people. And you'll have a better chance of succeeding in getting them to join with you in your goal to have a better America and a better community. We've got to reach across that line, because these people truly are not our enemies. They're people we differ with. And it's more important for you to talk to them than to talk to each other. Dr. King, Dr. Martin Luther King, who founded his movement in my hometown, made a very famous speech in 1963 from the mall in Washington, D.C. He said that I have a dream that one day in the red clay hills of Georgia, that the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will sit down around the table of brotherhood. I think if Dr. King was here tonight and today in our country, I think he might say that I had a dream that one day in the red clay hills of Georgia, and I believe that he might add in the barrios and in the ghettos, in the seats of economic and political power in this country, that the sons of slaves and the sons of former slave owners, and I think he might add today the homeless and the powerless and those who control the economic and political power in this country, will one day sit down around the table of personhood. Thank you and good luck. Thank you. Again, let me say you honor me by having me here, because you're the people, you're the guests of honor. You're the people that are working. And the things that I've been given credit for, please have your seat, be fine. The things that I've been given credit for, a lot of other people helped me do. It wasn't just the cases that I tried. We have 65 people that work at the Southern Poverty Law Center that produce our teaching tolerance education program that I know so many of you use. We have over 300,000 people who contribute to the work that we do and helping us build an endowment that we hope that one day will make it so that our work will be possible to continue without the very expensive costs of direct mail fundraising. But it's to you who give to our work that I thank. If there could be a happy ending to the Donald story, it'd probably be that Mrs. Donald, obviously a black woman, ended up with a deed to the Klan's national headquarters. Thank you.